ahead, Sean.
Go ahead, Matt.
People protested.
Oh, well.
A person allegedly protested. I think he was probably, CIA plant. But somebody unfurled 2 banners in Beijing, which again, we've established security is tight. And we'll put it up on screen with the translations because there's no way I remember what it said exactly off the top of my head.
You want to read out the translation of what the banner says?
Yeah, so one banner said, you could translate this in a bunch of different ways, but essentially, no to COVID tests, yes to food, no to lockdowns, yes to freedom, no to lies, yes to dignity, no to cultural revolution, yes to reform, no to leaders, yes to votes, don't be a slave, be a citizen. And then there was a second banner that said, students strike, workers strike, remove the traitor and dictator Xi Jinping.
I appreciate that. I was going to rely on just like an image, but then this is a podcast, so it makes sense to actually say things instead of relying on visuals.
Yeah. Well, we'll put the visual up for the people who are watching this one on YouTube.
Yeah.
So.
I think one of the interesting things in terms of how the party reacted with censorship is it's just so over the top.
The people who do anal checks of pigeons, they went over the top.
There's a lot of things being done to excess under Communist Party rule, but the censorship, like after these banners were unfurled, and they were, the police took them down almost immediately, but there's photos of them.
So yeah, it spread on social media quick.
Right. And so, Shelley, what are some of the things that got censored?
Oh, any discussion of like people who are getting their WeChat accounts suspended for sharing any photos or videos of the event. Then words like warrior, words like courageous person, words like I think the most ridiculous one is the words "I saw it" being censored. So literally, I saw it, like it.
So, if you're having like a WeChat conversation with, hey, did you see the latest Spider-Man movie? I saw it.
Right. And then like there's a song, what's it called? The Sutong Bridge or something?
Yeah, the overpass where the guy hung up these banners is called the Sutong Bridge. And so there was a song called the Sutong Bridge, and that song got taken off of all of these music platforms.
That was just an existing song that had come out years ago.
And then even dumber than that, another song that was just called Beijing's Bridge, which is not a reference to this particular bridge, just Beijing's Bridge also got taken off of music platforms.
Well, I think what the party really needs to do is like, what if somebody took photos of this event or even recordings of those songs and put them up pigeons' butts?
Okay.
And then release them into the city? Well, somebody might hear that or see that. They might grab a pigeon and open it up and take a look at the photo there.
Well, the thing that, okay. If you've ever been around pigeons, you know that whatever's up their butts comes out pretty fast. So I don't think people would have to go looking.
Fair point. And yet the party
went
looking.
There we go. Yeah. But the interesting thing about this protest, too, is, again, it was one person. In some of the videos and photos, you can see what looks like a guy in a construction worker outfit, like an orange jumpsuit or something, putting up the banners. And then there's a video.
So they should also ban any reference to the village people.
There you go. And then there's also video of him that looks like it's the police taking him into custody, like putting him in a police car. So this was, as far as we know, just one guy. And in any other country where you can protest, like this would have been just like some maybe kind of crazy guy putting up banners protest banners in the middle of this bridge overpass. But because it's China and it's Beijing and there's no protest allowed, this became like international news.
Yeah, just the other day I saw somebody driving a truck with a giant deer he made out of wood with the words "buck fightin'."
Mm-hmm.
And like this is what happens in America.
Wait, well, this was on the deer?
There was the cutout of the deer, a giant sticking out of his truck, and then the sign below that.
Okay.
But like our civilization has not collapsed in America because of this This one warrior.
But yeah, if that truck tried to said something like, fuck Xi Jinping,
or I saw it.
yeah, that it would be complete, yeah, that yeah.
It's just like in Hong Kong, they basically stopped people from walking around holding up blank pieces of paper.
Yes.
Right. And just like the level of paranoia that's expressed by the Chinese leadership is just it's just hard for me to understand. But obviously it means they're very, very strong and confident in their rule.
Well, I mean, again, in that propaganda video about Xi Jinping, or was it The Navigator, where you see the protests in the EU?
Oh, that was The Navigator, yeah.
That was The Navigator. Yeah, I mean, that's the protests are a sign of chaos. You don't...
Buck fighting is a sign of chaos.
My gosh, when people saw that, the cars were swerving everywhere. People ignored traffic signals. It was madness.
Mean, I suppose the doing the deer thing was, I guess, a little clever.
I don't know.
Because
just for the record, I do not necessarily endorse any deer-related protest messages that I see. Yes.
Yeah, I'm just still distracted by that idea. I hope you took a photo.
I'm driving a car. I'm not taking a photo.
Too bad.
Yeah. Well, okay. Or like, those little, like you'll see at gas stations a lot now, like a sticker of Joe Biden saying, I did that, pointing to the gas. Like that kind of a thing. Imagine if that happened in China. That would actually seem to be a little more effective of a protest than like unfurling two very conspicuous banners. But that's a good question. Like what kind of protest movements can really get going in China, considering the party will check the buttholes of pigeons? Like, could people do a sticker campaign? Just you could slap a little sticker.
I mean, now there's so much surveillance that I feel like you would definitely get caught very quickly.
That's a good point.
But I was thinking of it really depends on how, in terms of protests in China, it depends what you're protesting and how disruptive that is in relation to the CCP. Like when...
Because mass movements happen all the time in China.
Mass protests.
What if we want to spontaneously protest the Japanese?
Well, that will be tolerated up until a point when it actually becomes disruptive, like Shelley was saying.
Yeah, or I was thinking about like Evergrande, right? And was it Evergrande that the protests were against, where they were having...
And there's a parking lots. Yeah.
Yeah, and then they were like the actual employees were protesting because they had to buy Evergrande products and then they couldn't get their money back.
Mm-hmm.
Or the Henan Bank protests. They tolerated those for a few days. And then it was getting too big and they were starting to go to the government offices instead of just to the banks. And then that's when they started being like, oh, your health code is mysteriously red. You can't go anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I think it depends on the level of protest. But something like this in Beijing that actually names Xi Jinping and says to like remove the traitor Xi Jinping, that is not okay.
That's an escalation. But yeah, I get this question a lot. Like, why don't the Chinese people rise up? Why don't they do something? Why don't they protest? And I mean, it is difficult in that system to do it. Like when as you mentioned, like when the surveillance is so intense that like even sticking a little sticker on a gas pump would probably get you caught.
Yeah, I saw a news video. I think it was from BBC. This is a year or so before the pandemic, where the reporter was basically like somehow got access to inside one of the Chinese police surveillance bureaus. And it basically showed how his movements like all across the city were tracked by like a whole suite of surveillance cameras. So basically, like, in other words, that the police, and this is several years ago, could track an individual's movements anywhere across an entire city. And as they leave the zone of one camera, they enter the zone of another camera, and the system is able to just follow that individual through facial recognition. And so the level of surveillance that's been developed in the last 2 decades is just insane. Because just 20 years ago, surveillance was like, a building might have surveillance, a camera that would link to, VHS or Betamax tapes in their office, right? And they'd record their surveillance, but there wasn't any way to nationalize that or to hack to access that from a central location because it was all analog. And this digital revolution, in part helped by, technology from companies like Oracle and so on, are able to like transform China into this AI powered individual person tracking system. So there's just no leeway anymore to do it, and it's so easy for the police to nip anything in the bud.
Well, I mean, they didn't nip this guy.
Well, they nipped him pretty quick.
Afterwards, I mean, there were a lot of videos and photos of this. So,
right. And we also don't know how many other things like this have been stopped before they were begun.
Well, see, I don't think that, I think that I kind of vaguely remember that one you're talking about where they track the guy's movements around. And I think that there is a weird duality, though, when it comes to China's security system, where it's both very, very good and also not good.
Because sometimes the Huawei cameras just don't work properly.
Well, or they've overinflated their abilities in order to get government contracts or,
Or also just to be like a panopticon where everyone knows that they could be under surveillance at any given time. They just don't know if they are at that particular moment.
Yeah, so I think that is the point that the Communist Party cares about. It doesn't necessarily need to be able to stop every guy from being able to unfurl a banner, immediately or before they do it. They just want people to watch themselves and not, not be scared of crossing the line. Like when this guy unfurled these banners and then they took them down pretty quickly. By the time Western news organizations got to that place, it was maybe an hour or two later, and there's no sign of this protest. And then they start trying to ask people if they saw it, and people aren't willing to admit it. Most people were just wouldn't talk to them, pretended they didn't know what they were talking about, So that is the part of what you were calling the panopticon.